Screening as part of the St. Kilda Film Festival this week is a new short film called Breaking Plates. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer-director of the film, Karen Pearlman, and the producer, Richard James Allen. Karen and Richard, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Lovely to
Thank
see you, Peter. And hello, everyone.
Hello. Okay. Now, this is such a delightful film, and I love the sort of the integration of silent film footage and a sort of contemporary storyline. And I gather this is a continuation or a follow-up of I Want to Make Film About Women. Um, Karen, tell me about the process of putting all this together. It's such an incredible short film.
Well, thank you so much for that, Peter. I'm enjoying watching it still myself. So that's quite a thing for, if you don't hate your film after you finish it, that's a really good thing. And this film started way back in 2018 when I was in Italy for a wonderful festival called Il Cinema Ritrovato. And this festival brings together archivists and curators and cinephiles from all over the world and generally puts on films that, from the past, things that have been revived by archivists and curated into programs and so forth. So while I was there, I met the wonderful Maggie Hennefeld, and Maggie was working on creating a collection of 99 short films, um, women from the silent film era, the slapstick comedians, the cross-dressed cowgirls, the troublemakers, the rabble-rousers, the mayhem magicians, and so forth. And she was collecting all of these films, and I got really fascinated by the collection, and especially I must say by the physicality of the women in these clips. They're so energetic and wild. They really inspired me. So that was the start of a beautiful friendship, and it's now, quite a few years later. We're 7 years later, and the film is out and making its rounds. But what I was able to do once they had made this collection of films was work with the archive to tell a story about what would happen if we could put contemporary women into conversation with those women from the silent era. What would we learn from them, and would we understand why we're so much more polite? And so that's at the heart of Breaking Plates, is that conversation between the past and the present.
Well, that integration is just absolutely superb, and some of that original footage going back over 100 years is luminous. It is absolutely superb.
It is stunning, isn't it? And the films are from over 100 years ago. It's so they really overturn so many of our ideas about what silent film was. We tend to have this idea that women were, well mannered and they were clean and they were, sort of in the parlor. And it turns out they're not so much, that there were hundreds. And of course, as we know, there's, only 15% of the movies made in the early and silent film era still exist. So, this is, they're not this is a representative sampling, but who knows what else there might have been. The thing to remember, of course, about these incredible women is that they were really in charge of their stories and their characters. They were mostly vaudeville performers. So they would be performing in vaudeville and touring their shows around, and they would get to France mostly. South of France was a very big hub for making films in Europe, and they would make films of the characters and stories and kind of ideas that they had been developing all along. And the idea that we have that the director is in charge of all that, well, the director might have been some guy sitting in an office back in Paris going, yeah, I'm the director of the company or something like that. So it was very exciting to me to see these women have so much agency and, as you say, luminous, just popping off the screen with their energy.
So tell me about fashioning the screenplay, because it's such an intriguing and beautifully composed story, marrying the two sort of contemporary and archival footage and so on.
Well, you're very kind. For me, writing is torture. So So I worked with so my method that I used to get around the torture in this case was to get a whole bunch of screenshots, and I actually brought all of the clips into my editing software and made a lot of choices in editing about what kinds of things I would want to use. So I made a whole kind of folder full of fist fights, and a whole folder full of kisses, and a whole folder full of pratfalls, a whole folder full of breaking plates, and then I started to piece these together into a kind of a possible storyline where the present could interject. And so then the writing came out of that original structuring in editing of how a story might flow around the clips. A lot of family help from my very highly esteemed producer and key performer who is with us here today, and also my dramaturg who's down in St. Kilda and will be taking questions at the Q&A tomorrow. And yeah, it's a that it that my really, really important collaborators because as people may not know, the film industry in Australia and in Europe has always been a family business. So these people, they were running, families, circus families quite often, or theater families were actually just moving into film, and so that's more or less what we've done in our family.
Well, terrific stuff. I really enjoy it, and I know that your previous film won some awards as well. I want to make a film about women. Richard, I want to bring you into this. Tell me about producing Karen's film and also acting in it as well.
Well, look, I think this is a kind of film where you have to, if you're going to produce a film on this scale and this level of, I was going to say craziness, but it's more, it's, it's bravery about the nature of form. If you're going to produce a film with this kind of bravery about the nature of form, you have to be really open-minded. You have to be a sort of really problem-solving, and you have to go with that idea that, was partly inspired by these early women, that we don't have to accept cinema as this sort of McDonald's of endless, tasteless, boring, unhelpful, and unhealthy food to our brains and souls. So, to me, I was inspired by the idea of, wow, we can actually be inspired by the rambunctiousness of the early women, but also by their sense of freedom and the sense of freedom that existed at the beginning of cinema, that it wasn't a closed down form. It wasn't just a business model that was churning out the same thing all the time. So this film is really incredibly revolutionary, actually, in its sort of scope of like, well, what cinema can be. And I still believe that cinema is a young enough art form to have a lot of discoveries. And that's really the kind of spirit that I took into a fairly enormous task of producing it.
It was an enormous tax, and I really, shout out to Richard and so many collaborators were so key in making this happen. Richard is the kind of producer who doesn't say, "Oh, I don't think so." He says, "Okay," and gives it a go and goes. I'll say to Richard, "I think I need well, on I want to make a film about women." I said, "I think I need a dancer," and he got me five. So I'm like, "Oh, okay, I got to think about Richard." Yeah, I think I might need three or four dancers. 14 he gets. And he was right. I need them all.
Well, it
I
all
think,
worked. Yeah, go
I
on.
think I was going to say, I think there's a scale to this sort of thing, which is also part of the joyfulness that I hope the audiences get out of it. It's like the great musicals of the 40s. It's like you want that level of scale and of vivaciousness, and I think that comes from some expansiveness in the producing interpretation of the directing.
Fair enough. It all works so well. I was going to say, tell me about the set and about the whole production design and so on to make it all so seamless in many respects because again it looks so great.
Well, I think that it's really, really important to say that the people who work with who take direction, who work with direction, they are all storytellers. So producer, cinematographer, designer, sound designer, composer. We'll talk about that a bit later. I hope
Mm.
another amazing contribution to the film. But so we worked with a wonderful set designer, a graduate of NIDA. Her name is Camille Ostrowski. Write that down, everyone. If you're looking for a designer, Camille Ostrowski. Just so responsive and so enthusiastic. And of course, it's a very symbiotic relationship between Camille, the cinematographer, Justine Kerrigan, and the producer, Richard James Allen, because the three of them have to understand what is going on well enough to remake it in a sense, to direct their own departments and to direct these aspects of the film that are so important. So what Camille put together, we looked at a lot of silent film clips. We realized, for example, that they're often working with an almost triangular shaped set. It's more open at the front than it is at the back. We built this idea of the sort of frame within a frame that we were constantly shaping women in. So if you look at the set, you see there's a window at the back and then a kind of a door frame that is sort of whenever the gorgeous lead actor Violette Ayad is kind of trapped back there. She's trapped in a frame within a frame, which is how we kind of bring across themes about, women having to break out of these parlors and where we have to learn from the women who in the silent films they have, really similar ornate, elaborate parlors as we have as Camille designed and constructed for this, and they just bust the walls down and they slam through the windows and they throw the furniture and so forth, and so we had to build a very elaborate and ornate set in order to do exactly that kind of destruction and mayhem.
Yes, exactly. Plus, of course, the budget for the plates that are broken. I mean, all of that is so important.
Talk to Richard about that. I was like, I need a plate. Okay, then.
No, that all is wonderful. And I'm glad you also mentioned music because Angela Little's music is also quite superb and so well integrated.
Yeah, Richard might want to talk about that process a little bit too. Richard's one of those unusual producers who stays involved all the way into post-production. We almost didn't have Angela. We were so lucky to get her. And Angela wrote a song for us that is my heart song, if you will, now. And Taylor Swift, if you're out there listening, you should do a cover of this song. I
Totally.
mean, Angela's a genius. Can you imagine taking a line of dialogue? This is my favorite line of dialogue from the film. It goes, violating realism is a victimless crime. Now, can you imagine getting that to scan into a song? Angie did it.
I think one of the things that, was great working with her. Um, what we really try to do in the process of what I try to do as a producer, and I think it's sort of inherent in Karen's ideas, is we try to give people, our collaborators, a lot of room to be very creative. So to me, I feel like I've succeeded if every person feels like they had a chance to do their very best work within the frame of the idea that's being shaped. And I think that for Angela, who's a stunning composer, but is sometimes sort of put in a kind of more conservative mold, this was like a huge chance for her to bust out and go, wow, look at the incredible range of what I can actually do, which is kind of one of the big themes of the film. So her music is an enaction of the very joyful breaking plates of the film itself. And it's just magnificent.
Truly, it is. We had such fun recording it as well. We had a bunch of different instruments in it, and the instruments kind of became certain key figures' voices. I particularly remember the trombone player coming in, the trombone player being the voice, the musical voice, if you will, of Handsome Hank, the character Richard plays, who never speaks in the whole film. He's a silent film character in a sense.
So it just so wonderful. And I must ask you also about the editing process because that tight 25-minute running time and so on is just flows so well, but flows so quickly as well. Very cleverly done, I thought.
I'm glad you think so. Thank you for that. I started my work in the film industry as an editor, so I really do think through the editing process. And as I mentioned earlier, editing is part of writing for me. So I get things into the editing software in order to be able to see them and think about how they will flow. And then the writing is a highly choreographic process as well because I'm looking at in Breaking Plates, I'm looking at the gestures and I'm thinking about how they might translate into the present and what context we might put them in. So, and then I go back to my wonderful montage theorist forebears, the ones I've made films about. That I Want to Make a Film About Women is about a montage editor in the Soviet Union, and so is Woman with an Editing Bench. And so I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot from women editors throughout the last 125 years who really understand that what you're doing with editing is you're making movement makes sense. It's a choreographic art. You're making the movement of story, the movement of emotion, and the movement of image and sound, and you're creating phrases of movement that are as significant to understanding for an audience as, say, words. It doesn't matter so much what is said as how it is said. And the same happens in cinema, which is an art of movement as well. Kine. The word cinema is based on the word kine in Greek, meaning movement. It's a movement art. And so I really approach it that way right from the get-go. Writing, directing, editing, they're all about shaping the movement of how things will flow.
Yeah.
If I may, my old book, Cutting Rhythms, which originally was published in 2009, was re-released in its third edition this month. And Cutting Rhythms has all of this editing theory is embedded in that. This was my PhD thesis, and I've been building on it ever since. The idea of editing as choreography.
Ah, what a great recommendation. People should go and get the book. That's that's wonderful. Tell me, what made you decide to title the film Breaking Plates?
It's funny. Do we think it's the right title, Richard? Because we went through a few. There are notes in my folder I looked at the other day. I went, "Oh, this used to be called Smashing Dishes."
I think we had a conversation where we thought breaking plates was more more percussive and more dynamic than smashing dishes. So
And
yeah.
the thing about the women in the early film clips is that they're joyfully destructive. They're queens of destruction, as Maggie Hannafeld would say. They throw things, they break things. It's what they have to do. So you don't very often see the women getting in fistfights. In these early clips, you certainly don't see them handling guns. The eruption of expressive force often comes about through them smashing something up.
And
Yeah.
obviously that is a metaphor for, not being stuck in a domestic frame, that they can be more than that sort of limitation, which I think is, continues to be interestingly, you know, when Karen started making her trilogy of films about women editors, which is now actually, if I can make another plug, released by Ronan as a series called An Editor's Anthology. Those films, including I Want to Make a Film About Women, they were really, actually released just before this wave of realizing that women haven't been fully recognized in the industry, at the sort of uh, crest of the wave, and just sort of when the wave was starting to break. And so it's really interesting that they sort of travel that sort of literally historic moment of people going, well, hold on, why don't we think about women and in their contributions? And interestingly, this film comes at a point where, in a way, that ought to be now taken for granted, but instead we're seeing this sort of global, pushback against freedoms across the world, including women. So it's sort of really interesting how in the sort of shape of the films, and this one I think becomes in itself a kind of political act of reminding um, that this struggle can't be taken for granted.
Mm.
It's rather sad, actually, but it's a sort of it's a joyful inciting to keep breaking those plates.
I think that's an important point, actually. I just didn't want to be sad. I'm not interested in being sad, so we're mad instead.
Love it. It's such a superb short film, and I'm so glad that it's screening as part of the St Kilda Film Festival, um, uh, coming up this week. And what currency then will the film have after that?
Well, it's actually going around the world at the moment, screening all over the place. So that's really exciting. It's going to be in Paris, Amsterdam, Bologna at this Il Cinema Ritrovato, the film which is great. That's I think the biggest sort of film festival of recovery of early cinema. So it's in a nice circle since that's where it began, as well as numerous other places in London and Brussels. Back in America, it's screening. It's going to be screening at Revelation, Perth International Film Festival. We're really excited about that. And we've kind of created a few paths for it. So the film can be screened at the moment, for example, in a film festival, but it's also being screened as part of a series of a feature-length evening called Breaking Plates and Smashing the Patriarchy. Breaking Plates and Smashing the Patriarchy is a conversation between the past and the present. It begins with Breaking Plates and then has 9 of the films that inspired it afterwards. So you get a sense to sort of see the larger things. And that's touring around to lots of galleries and repertory cinemas and university cinemas. And if people want to program that, they should reach out. We're also about to sign a contract with a major international distributor for Breaking Plates. I won't say who it is because we've actually got the paperwork, but I haven't signed it yet, so I better not say. But a very big distributor in the world, one of the biggest in this area, is keen to distribute it. So I think there are many glorious pastures ahead for Breaking Plates.
That is great to hear because the film deserves that sort of coverage, as do the previous films as well that you've both been involved with, which is fantastic, especially for Karen's superb writing. It's just so interesting. And I love the use of silent cinema in a creative sort of way as well, which tends to be neglected, and which is great to see. And the role of women, of course, in cinema, which is so important. So I must ask you both, what's next for you both?
Well, thank you for asking it, and thank you so much for having us here with this lovely appreciation you have for the films. It's really heartwarming, truly. And it inspires me to go on to what's next. I'm gonna say it out loud on the radio here. Everybody ready? I've started working on a feature. I
Ah.
think it's time. So wish me luck, everybody. Godspeed, and talk to me again in 5 years.
I think Physical TV Company, which is our company, is we'll keep making more shorts, but we're trying to move to some features now for Karen, probably for Samuel Lucas Allen as well, possibly for myself. And another thing that's, I guess, coming up just immediately for me, I'll put it out there, is on August the 9th in Sydney, we'll be having the book launch of my first novel, More Lies, which is also an audiobook which I recorded with Jadzia Allen, and that's going to be available, wow, on every single phone in the entire world on Spotify and Audible. So I hope a few million people download More Lies.
The book. Yes, okay. Excellent stuff. Look, but
Audiobook.
yeah, both of you are just so creative and interesting in terms of the works that you do and what you produce, and I'm very impressed. So great talking to you both. We've been speaking to Karen Pearlman and Richard James Allen all about Breaking Plates on at the St Kilda Film Festival this week. Thank you so much, both of you, for talking with me.
Thank you so much for having
Thank you,
us.
Peter. Lovely to spend time with
Keep
you.
cinema alive.
All the best. Bye bye.